seeing more of an investment from healthcare leaders in their team members. So when an individual raises their hand, they want to walk into a healthcare setting and be an employee. It's working with that employee to pathway them through. So you may come in dietary or as a CNA or some lower skilled position, but healthcare leaders need to understand that person's not going to stay if they're not continually invested in. So we're seeing strategies like that. So I think it's more so taking a step back from healthcare, I think we look at generationally how people are engaged in the workforce. This newer generation needs to feel that there's value to them in their workforce. They value work-life balance. So what does that look like for critical care opportunities in the healthcare system where you have to show up, you have to be in person, you're working with people. Those are all tangible things that can't be removed from a job description. Like if you talk with our IT colleagues, they're building in some practices for flexibility. So if healthcare systems in serving people are not able to build in flexibility, then what can you build into those roles? So those are the conversations that we're having with leaders to understand, how can you flexibly create positions to appeal to a younger generation, because that's where your population of workforce is coming from. Well, that's a great question. I think they do. I think of my own experiences knowing some younger individuals. They need younger individuals. What we're seeing is they need to be kind of shown the why. Why is this happening? What is the benefit to them, to their family, to their circles? Technology needs to be included. We're all glued to our phones. It's not unique. But for younger generations, how are you gamifying opportunities? So I think they do want to work. I think what they want their work life is different than older generations. But the idea of generational differences in the workplace is not unique to this time and place. It's just more exacerbated post the COVID situations we're dealing with. Healthcare becomes more technologically advanced. Probably most of our doctors' offices and the ways that we engage in healthcare is, in an online setting. So we're making appointments online, we're doing telehealth appointments, and on the backside, those practitioners need to be able to appropriately move through those technological changes. So, an emphasis on patient care and safety and security. So understanding how your information is not being sold to someone else. In the news, not daily, but high numbers talking about how healthcare systems, or even in Las Vegas the other week, how a casino was hacked into. So those are real challenges that healthcare systems didn't have to deal with maybe 20 years ago. And so we're working with those health systems to understand, how can we prepare our students to be ready to deal with those potential challenges of now and the future. Great question. I think if I think about back to my initial interaction with education, right? Like, I went to college, I interacted with education, and I took some online courses, and it was very much like, read this section, watch this video, really boring. So that's not what we're offering to individuals right now. The way technology has changed so quickly, the learning management platform and how individuals are using that technology is very engaging. The use of AI is happening. So you're being able to progress at your pace. So we're understanding that the learner wants to move quickly, whether that's an adult individual who is working full-time and they're accessing education at 9 p.m. at night, or they're a high school student who has a study hall every day and they're going to be able to work through their different modules. But it has to be really visual and understand kind of like the end goal. So if you think about how a project manager tracks a project, that's how the educational system is tracking for a student. So, someone asked me yesterday what our firm does, and I was able to say, we're a consultative workforce development solutions body of practice, right? Like, we meet people where they are, whether they're an employer or an individual. And the thing that we hear, despite their age range or wherever people are coming from, is having individuals ready to understand what work means. And so it's those soft skills, those professional skills that we believe are essential skills for people to have in the workforce. So it's not so much now as, showing up on time and doing your job. Those are really critically important. But understanding what it means to interact with your manager or with other team members, or if you're a patient-facing person, how are you ensuring that you're ready to talk to someone when it's Monday morning and you had a late night last night? So you have to turn off that piece in your brain and really move into what it means to talk to people. So in this consistently digital age where people are less and less interactive at times, we're trying to ensure that healthcare is still people focused, and that has to be the forefront. So I think for what we're talking about right now, first of all, there's never one solution to any problem, especially in workforce development. So the solution that we're most interested in solving right now is developing that pipeline of skilled workers into healthcare. So we're talking about below nursing. Those individuals may or may not be working at a Wendy's or Sheetz down the road. They could be employed or unemployed. Like, there's a variety of different factors that make up this population. The one true factor is the majority of these people are not able to pay upfront for their coursework. So many health systems have implemented practices such as tuition reimbursement, right? Come in, we'll get you can pay for your opportunity, and then we'll give you a bump in pay. Well, on average, the courses that we're offering or partnering with, someone has to pay $250 out of pocket for a max of 12 months or whatever. So it sounds kind of a low number that someone would have to put out to access this education, but by and large, people are not able to come up with that $250 a month to make that change, to move in that career that could change the trajectory of their life. So where we are seeing the most benefit for organizations in changing the culture of how people access education and stay in an organization is tuition advancement. So they're saying, I believe in you. You've been with our organization for 6 months. You've proven your cause. We're going to invest in you and pay for you to take this course. Now there's, on the back end, we'd like you to stay for potentially 1 or 2 years. But more often than not, I think 89% of the individuals who engage in our educational programming are still with their company in 2 years. So look at that ROI. Like, instead of spending $5,000 to go recruit someone new, you're spending less than $5,000 investing in your team members. So healthcare is unique in this perspective. If you look at a manufacturing facility, by and large, they're able to potentially pull people off the floor, move people around to have them take a class, and the impact on their return on investment is less. In healthcare, as we know, they're dealing with actual patients, ensuring that people get the care they need. So having someone step away from providing that care is a challenge to their business practice model. It's based around it's based around people. So the challenge that healthcare leaders need to balance is investing in their people and creating space for them to access education, but also not impede helping their people. That's why we love the virtual learning model. It allows the individual to access that online didactic information. So you're getting that bookwork straight up front. And then the healthcare systems are really only on the hook, or they're really only needing to work within a person's schedule for that hands-on clinical component. And the benefit in that model is that the healthcare systems or leaders are able to say, okay, Lauren's going to come in today, she's going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's how it's going to help their business move forward. There is a really robust workforce development system, both nationally and statewide. So the way funding comes out for workforce development is via our federal government. It's allocated to the states, and then each state is able to appropriate that in different ways. Each community deals with their funding differently, but where I'm going with that is that there is ample funds to help individuals find their new career path. If they're unemployed or underemployed, there's opportunities to help those individuals. Sometimes money can help even employers as well. So it flows back and forth. But what we frequently find with those public dollars is that they are very restrictive, or they can be very restrictive. So for someone to qualify for some of those funding, you're jumping through quite a bit of hoops. And on the one hand, I understand and agree with that, right? Like, we want to have some oversight into our funding. We have to show outcomes. But sometimes it can be restrictive for organizations who really want to transform their business practices in a workforce development setting to access those dollars and do what they need to do. So where I see Emerge stepping into that mix is really to understand what funding sources can be used where, and to leverage our workforce development knowledge to bring in some private dollars to help support that. And what I mean by that is, working with employers to understand, if you use tuition advancement versus tuition reimbursement, how does that open you up for dollars via this foundation or other opportunities for your individuals? We're working with a group of high school students right now. It's a pilot, a group of 10 to 20 students at a school district. We are using public dollars for that because it's a really great need. What I hope to do is leverage that use of public dollars with my private sector folks and say, hey, listen, they put $10,000 into this pot. Can you match that? That's the only way moving forward that we'll find sustainability. So frequently via the federal government, so tuition reimbursement, that there's like a 5150, there's a dollar amount that every individual can access. Companies can access dollars for tuition reimbursement, and there's a cap on what that is per person in terms of like how they're taxed on that. So when we work with companies, they're well aware of, hey, listen, I can give my person this amount of training. It falls under that cap. When we look to help support that individual, maybe they need some help with transportation or childcare, that doesn't always qualify under those different tuition reimbursement or advancement options. So we have to kind of find some other dollars to support that. I think there's dollar matching is important because, again, it extends the life of a project, creates sustainability. I think the public sector does have a strong handle on what employers need by way of large-scale data sets. So, they're frequently pulling, whether it's via Lightcast, which is a large private sector national company that pulls data sets, whether they're working with the Bureau of Labor and Industry on smaller subsets of data, they can really bring that to the table. Where there might be a gap is an analysis, so understanding what it means for a local community, local organization. So that's often a strategy that we can bring to the table as well. I don't think any dollar provides intentional obstruction. I think where we see obstruction is we may want to be more creative in how dollars are spent. Labor and Industry just released some dollars recently, and we took a look at them, and we thought about applying for it. As a private sector employer, we weren't eligible to write for the dollars ourselves. So we had to partner with a nonprofit or another higher ed partner to write for the dollars. I'm not inherently opposed to that, but at the same time, I do think that some public sector folks can have just as many smart strategies as our friends in the nonprofit or public sector. So it can be potentially a barrier for projects to pick up and get off the ground. First of all, Pennsylvania has never had a statewide economic development or workforce development strategy that's been effectively implemented. So it's a great first step. Secondarily, what we're seeing with this funding is that funding that's been allocated, from the past fiscal year, if an organization hasn't expended at least half their funds, they're not eligible to write for new funding sources, which is fantastic, right? Like, get the money, spend the money, and then see the data results behind that. Where we've been able to see success with companies, despite having maybe a data set to point them to, there's more national research that we can show them that, making this investment has helped, this person or organization in Tennessee, for example. Or we lean on some of our content providers who do have that data set from the past 10 years of how employees, individuals have engaged in this virtual learning. This is their placement rates. This is how long they've stayed at organizations. This is how they progressed and the credentials that they've obtained. So despite not having some local data, we can pull from larger sources. I hate to say I like them all, but I do. And this is why I like it. And it's going to be a challenge for us, but I think it's a needed challenge. So many of the programs that we offer, and I'm talking about the high school space right now, take it back. Many of the programs that we offer, a student potentially could have that experience in a face-to-face traditional higher ed experience, or potentially a secondary ed, career and technical education. They all follow a very subscribed program of study. They follow, this is how you learn education, this is what you do day in, day out. I think where we have an opportunity is to say, education doesn't have to look like it did, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And our employers are driving that conversation. They're saying we need people to access these certifications faster than ever. So what excites me about all the programs is it's a way for someone to access medical assisting in a different space. They may not have time to go Tuesdays and Thursdays in the evening to receive that instruction. All of the programs are so aligned to what our communities need. We can pick and place the programs to the best fit with what an organization needs. I think what we have observed is that, first of all, healthcare is incredibly regulated, as it should be, right? We're caring for people, the most vulnerable populations. It needs regulations. But because of that, our colleagues in healthcare have potentially done things the same way, right? They have policies that are in place. This is how they do that. And when you suggest a new way of doing things, there could be some challenges. So I think it's a little bit of like, this is how we've done things. This is how we're moving into, this is how we train people. This is how they access education. And a little bit of as well, if we do change, what does that look like and how do we get there? So having some of those uncomfortable conversations is critical. We've been successful working with leaders to say, hey, you look at the curriculum, take a look at the curriculum, sit with it, poke some holes in it. Tell us what you don't like about this. Tell us what couldn't work. And maybe some of those things are a deal breaker for a particular course. We had one course that we worked with a leader, and they said, I don't have enough experienced people to observe and manage this new team member. So we said, okay, sounds like you need to kind of pull together and understand what training and development means in this particular part of your organization. And that's fine. Like I said earlier, we're never going to be the one true solution for every workforce need, but we believe we can be at the table to help figure out most of them. Lots of change. The past 5 years through the pandemic has accelerated the change that we saw, starting with how individuals are accessing education online and what that looks like. I had a colleague who enrolled in an online MBA program that was accelerated, that was a fourth of the price from anywhere else. So we're seeing higher ed partners not being afraid to challenge their accreditation and status quo, to say we can do things differently than we did before, and we should do it differently. Just because we've done something the same way doesn't mean we have to continue in that path. So we're seeing more continued movement into virtual learning. How is AI talking into that? Iterative learning. So we talked with a company last week or 2 weeks ago that for their learning platform, how you and I experience, say, medical assisting course, not medical assisting, but how we experience this learning is totally different. So if I come in and I already know the first 3 chapters, I jump to chapter 4 right away and say I progress at my own pace. You may need to work at chapter 1 for a little bit longer, and then you race through to chapter 9 while I'm still at chapter 4. So it starts to learn me and send me only questions of things I need to know. So instead of just everybody going through the same thing at one time, that differentiated instruction to allow people to progress. And I think finally partnerships too. I think there's this partnership opportunity between higher ed partners, private sector, organizations that have really on the forefront of what learning and development looks like, bringing that employer perspective continually to a higher ed focus, are kind of the ways that things are moving. You can't ignore the growth in healthcare. And I hate to say it like this, but it is the lowest of the hanging fruits. Healthcare needs assistance, and it's a no-brainer in your community that a higher ed leader could find success by making the investment in adding on short-term certificate programs. And where does that go from there, right? So once you help an organization understand that pipeline need, okay, what's next? What kind of leadership skills do your other frontline workers need? How can we help upskill your human resources teams? Continually adding value to the employers in your community is just a best practice that a higher ed partner could do. Like what we found most recently is finding the innovative people in an organization that are willing to champion change. So really working with those individuals who are the decision makers, who understand the total complex needs of an organization, whether that be a higher ed, a healthcare system, and a school district, like what we found with the leaders in our local community. But then immediately looping in those individuals who are actually going to make that work happen. right? Like this is not a downward dictation of how workforce development should work. It's identifying the need and then bringing in those team members to say, okay, listen, we all agree that this is a problem. We believe that this is a solution. Let's operationalize that. I think sometimes it's basic project management, right? Like you bring in a solution and then you walk away, and then sometimes things don't materialize. So that's been the key critical piece to our success, is having those team members walk alongside each other. I think also quickly, early and often gathering data. So we're gathering data right now on the students that we're enrolling in these programs. We're gathering data on where they come from, where do they want to go, their interests and aptitudes, and then we're going to follow them through that process, and then we're going to learn from that, right? How do we better work with a student who knows exactly what they want to do, they want to go in healthcare, and this can help them with a certificate towards a college application for a high school student. Or conversely, a student, whether they're adult or high school, who has no idea what they want to do in healthcare, they love the idea of healthcare, they've talked with an HR leader from the health system and this is their pathway in. What was their motivation that kept them moving, and kind of where do they end up, and how do we work with that student continually to move them up and through the system? Our success as a company has started and it will continue through student success. That's the lifeblood of what we do. We are ensuring that students get the best information up front, and then once they're enrolled in their program of choice, we are actively walking with them to make sure that they're not stopping off for any reason. It always starts with the employer, always 100%. Where the higher ed partner piece comes in is that having the partnership with a higher ed institution often offers validity to particularly a high school student parent, right? Because we have been told for years and years, college, and that's fine. College is great. It's a fantastic learning opportunity, but it's not the be all end all landing spot for every student or every student right now. So having that branding opportunity, having those articulated credits, be validated through a higher ed partner, really tells the story to the parent that this is a pathway towards success, just like my neighbor's kid who is going to higher ed right away off the bat. So that has been the strategy for that mechanism. I'm Lauren Hollybeck. I am the Senior Vice President of Business and Workforce Development, and I work at Emerge Education. I love that every day is different, and I love that we get to creatively problem solve with like-minded team members to really help make an impact in our organizations and communities.